me show you this. I saw this a couple of days ago in Blacklock's Reporter. They do great work over there. Feds told they went too far. Cabinet, in confidential polling, was told many Canadians supported the Freedom Convoy, with the majority opposed to use of extraordinary police powers to end the protest, documents show. Most felt this action represented significant overreach, pollsters told the Privy Council office, though a small number of participants felt implementing the Emergencies Act was a necessary step given the disturbance caused by the seemingly indefinite nature of the protest. Most felt this action represented significant overreach by the federal government, as they interpreted this as limiting the right of these Canadians to peaceful protest, said a pollster's report, Continuous Qualitative Data Collection of Canadian Views. The findings were based on federal focus groups held nationwide from February 2nd to 28th as Cabinet invoked the act to end a truckers' blockade outside Parliament. Researchers found support for the Freedom Convoy from British Columbia to Prince Edward Island, so the whole country. But we went looking for that survey. Now, though that survey has been conveniently disappeared from the public record, we were able to get our hands on it. It's 80-some pages long. I'll publish it so you can read it in full, because I think you should. You'll see your politicians lying to you. It does say that the government was informed through their own survey data that many people, regardless of their viewpoints on the mandates, disapproved of the unlawful, unconstitutional crackdown on peaceful protesters in Ottawa by way of invoking martial law using the Emergencies Act. Let's read some of those findings together, shall we? A significant number identified with the frustration expressed by the protesters regarding ongoing public health measures, even if they disagreed with some of the methods. Among participants who were supportive of the protest and their aims, it was felt that the protest had been mostly peaceful and that these individuals had the right to express their opinions. While some were hesitant to condone the disruption caused by the protests, most of these participants felt the aim of the protest of ending COVID-19 mandates was justified and something they too supported. Most of the participants. A few participants expressed excitement regarding what they perceived as Canadians standing up for their rights and freedoms and were passionate in their support for these protests. A small number also felt media coverage of the protests had been primarily one-sided and had unfairly portrayed the protests in a mostly negative light. For those who felt the Emergencies Act was a disproportionate response on the part of the federal government, many thought there were other steps that could have been taken prior to invoking this legislation. This is interesting. Most of these participants believed the protests to be primarily legal and peaceful and did not represent a public order emergency. Some of the participants were particularly unnerved by the reports of protesters and their supporters having their bank accounts frozen and expressed anxiety at law enforcement being imbued with this power. A few expressed a growing lack of trust in the federal government, which they felt was limiting the rights of Canadians to protest in a peaceful manner and were concerned the Emergencies Act could be used routinely going forward to limit public dissent. Asked how they felt the government of Canada could have responded, those opposed to the use of the Emergencies Act suggested more steps could have been taken by federal officials to open up a dialogue with the protesters and hear their concerns. A small number of these participants felt that rather than denouncing the protests, the federal government should have listened to them. Well, if you got all your news from the mainstream media, that's definitely not the sense that you would get. You might even think that you were largely alone, completely alienated in believing that the government had gone too far in seizing bank accounts, stomping on old ladies, targeting journalists, and arresting grandmothers for organizing month-long street parties. You would think that you were in the minority. You see, it's subtle, it's destabilizing, and it works on some people. That's why the government does it.
Canadians appear to be nearly split when it comes to protests having an influence in loosening pandemic restrictions. An Ipsos poll exclusive to Global News conducted after police enforcement began in Ottawa shows 54% of Canadians believe the nationwide trucker protests had at least some effect on provincial governments easing restrictions. The majority of Canadians disapprove of how Justin Trudeau handled the protests, with 57% not happy with how the Prime Minister dealt with proceedings. Conservative Party leaders and the truckers themselves also had a majority disapproving of their handling of the situation. But when it comes to how the protests in Ottawa came to an end, the majority of Canadians, nearly 6 in 10, saying they believe they were dealt with in the best possible way, given the circumstances.
Oh, but that's not what the data says. Now, I know why the Liberals are lying about the public support for what they did to the convoy. They, like all cult leaders, have a pathological need to hold on to power at all costs and by any means. But the media, for them, it's more cynical. They'll do whatever their paymaster tells them. If Justin Trudeau is the cult leader on the street corner telling you to question your reality, the mainstream media is surely the sandwich board he's wearing.
What you just saw was an excerpt from my nightly show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every weekday, I do a monologue. Usually it's about half an hour. Then I interview an interesting guest, and then we read my hate mail or my fan mail, whichever is more fun. It's only available behind a paywall, though. That's how we pay our bills here at Rebel News. We don't take a dime from Justin Trudeau. But the good news is it's only $8 a month, about half the price of Netflix. And in addition to my nightly show, you also get weekly shows from 4 other friends here at Rebel News. So you're getting 36 shows a month just for $8. I think it's worth it. And even if you're not quite sure, do it anyways, because we rely on viewers like you to keep us free and independent. I promise you I'll never take a dime from Trudeau. Just go to rebelnewsplus.com and click subscribe. Thanks.